Welcome to Max's Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thank you kindly for stopping by. I'd like to thank His Excellency the Ambassador of the Russian Federation, Alexander Makarenko, and Ms. Elena Shadrina for a very lovely, very authentic Russian dinner last night. It was quite delicious, actually. Cold soup, some caviar, very tasty indeed. Lots of fascinating perspectives from Pushkin through to the fact that apparently Crimea was in fact first colonized by the Greeks, apparently. Home thoughts, I start with a photograph of M51, a galaxy sparkling in X-rays. Then I'm going to jump to Giuseppe di Lampedusa, the Leopard, Il Gatto Pardo. If we want things to stay as they are, things will have to change. On that note, I'll put up a photograph of a leopard in the tree that I took in the Samburu, and then a link to a documentary, Don Delillo documentary, which I've linked to before, and another analysis of him by Vince Passaro. Images, especially photographs, with their insinuating organizational power, form a narrative line in Mao too. They are also a part of its inspiration. Long before he had written anything, says Nan Graham, his present editor at Viking, Don told me he had two folders, one marked art and the other marked terror. Eventually the two folders became one. I saw a photograph of a wedding conducted by Reverend Moon of the Unification Church, Delillo says, and it was just lying around for months, a wedding in Seoul in a soft drink warehouse, about 13,000 people. And when I looked at it again, I realized I wanted to understand this event, and the only way to understand it was to write about it. For me, writing is a concentrated form of thinking. And I had another photograph. It was a picture that appeared on the front page of the New York Post in the summer, I think, of 1988, and it was a photograph of J.D. Salinger. And that apparently was terribly unhappy and a very frightening photograph. And then going back to this book, which really was remarkable, Mao too orients itself around certain other contemporary scenes, other photos from the art and terror folders, the ramshackle city of homeless living in Tompkins Square Park in New York, the Sheffield, England soccer tragedy, the frenzied mourners in Tehran following the death of Ayatollah Khomeini, the massacre at Tiananmen Square. These events come into the novel via Karen, who sees most of them on television. They form a coherent narrative of images within the larger story, images in which the individual has been crushed by the primitive and lethal instincts of mob culture. Like all of Delillo's work, Mao too deals forcibly and uncannily with the iconic fears of the moment: trampling crowds, psychic unraveling, organized terror, and as always with Delillo, isolation and death. I think that's a very good analysis. I don't know if I agree with Delillo remarks, but I do think we can connect novelists and terrorists here. In a repressive society, a writer can be deeply influential, but in a society that's filled with glut and repetition and endless consumption, the act of terror may be the only meaningful act. People who are in power make their arrangements in secret, largely as a way of maintaining and furthering that power. People who are powerless make an open theatre of violence. True terror is a language and a vision. There is a deep narrative structure to terrorist acts, and they infiltrate and alter consciousness in ways that writers used to aspire to. Interesting. I'll put up a photograph of the church of Reverend Moon, the Unification Church, and a mass wedding about which the book refers. I wrote a piece on the 17th of November 2012 talking about the madding crowd, and then I was referring to an article in 1997 which said one of the defining bifurcations of the future will be the conflict between information masters and information victims. The information warfare will not be couched in the rationale of geopolitics, but will be spawned, like any Hollywood drama, out of raw emotions, hatred, jealousy, greed. Emotions rather than strategy will set the terms of information warfare struggles. I like this quote from a piece written by Francis Fukuyama, who says, as the foreign policy analyst Walter Russell Mead recently wrote, old-fashioned geopolitics has returned big time. Absolutely agree with him. The Deputy Foreign Minister Vladimir Titov told Interfax, we cannot see such a build-up of the alliance's military power near the border with Russia as anything else but a demonstration of hostile intentions. Then, of course, this first ever attack yesterday on Pakistan's largest airport deals a blow to Prime Minister Sharif's efforts to end an insurgency. It was revenge for the torture of our comrades having been facing in jails and military action in Waziristan. Now the government should get ready for more. This was the first ever attack on Pakistan's largest airport. Clear indication that the threat of terrorism is spreading from tribal Pakistan to mainland Pakistan and its cities. The threat posed by Afghan and Pakistani Taliban to both countries and the region is very significant. I'll put up a photograph of members of the Pakistani paramilitary arriving at Jinnah Airport in Karachi, and another one. Brahimi, who was the erstwhile envoy to Syria, says it will become another Somalia. It will not be divided as many have predicted. It's going to be a failed state with warlords all over the place. And then apparently the main newspaper in China yesterday said, over the past few months from Kiev to Bangkok, the politics of the street and public clashes have caused deep sorrow. Looking back at the color revolutions which have occurred in recent years, how can we not say with deep feeling, rejoice that we have resolutely upheld socialism with Chinese characteristics? Otherwise, would China have peace? From Western Asia to North Africa, many countries have slipped into the confused madness of Western democracy, which has neither brought happiness nor stability, the paper said. And then this comes from Global Research. Take a look at every corner of the globe today. Like never before seen on this planet, the global chessboard is fast being carved up, with provocative red lines drawn in the sand, resulting from rapid military armament and troop deployment throughout this ever-increasing bipolar world. Currency markers, the euro is back below 136 at 135.90. Remember, it dropped as low as 135.03 on June 5th, which was the lowest since February the 6th. And it's confounding, folks, that it's remained so resilient. And I think the euro's resilience speaks to the Chinese recalibrating their reserves and increasing their exposure to the euro. Dollar index 80.60, Japanese yen 102.36, Swissy 0.8972, pound holding above 168 at 168.09, Aussie 0.9357, India rupee 59.28. South Korean won is at the strongest level since August 2008, 10.1635. Rial 222.92, that's rallied a little bit of late. Egyptian pound 7.1507 and the South African rand 10.6386. Global FX volatility fell to 5.8%. This is real lows now, compared to 27% in October 2008 after Lehman's collapsed. The yen is down 4.7% over the past year, euro is up 2.1%, and the dollar has declined 0.7%. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index. I still think when you're at the top of the range, euro dollar, I'll put up a 3-month chart of that, back below 136. Um, Interesting piece, a chart of the day in Bloomberg, tracking China's total reserves, treasury holdings, and share of global foreign currency reserves. And it explains, I think, the fact that the Chinese keep the one pegged by selling dollars, but that distorts their foreign exchange reserves and creates a need to buy more euros to balance it all out. Then someone else saying the euro right now is becoming the favorite funding currency of the carry trade, which is true. Gold at 1254.205, I think it will break lower again. Touched 1240.73, that was June 3rd. That was a January 31st low. Crude oil, I'll put up a 5-day chart. Strong move yesterday, last at 104.66. Gained substantially yesterday's trading session, climbed $1.75 to the highest close since March 3rd. Clearly, there is an OPEC meeting, and I think crude oil markets remain tight. I think on top of that, you've had China, which we saw data of and I referred to previously, having been a big buyer in the markets as well. Cocoa is at 33-month highs, best performing commodity, I believe. Booming consumption, particularly in Asia, is expected to inflate demand for the main ingredient in the $100 billion chocolate industry by about 1 million tons, or around a quarter of world production by 2020. Then Scotch exports hit an all-time high of £4.3 billion in 2013, according to figures in April, released in April by the Scotch Whisky Association. Americans were the thirstiest for Scotch, buying nearly 20% of all exports in value terms. South Korean won, I'll put up a 1-year chart. As you can see, this is the strongest since August 2008. Coming to sub-Saharan Africa, the IMF says it may cut South African growth forecast to 2% or less. Following the release of the first quarter gross domestic product numbers, we're likely to revise our forecast. This is Nasha Mave, rep of the IMF in South Africa. They had previously projected 2.3% expansion, may be heading for its first recession in 5 years after GDP shrank an annualized 0.6% in the first quarter. Mining, of course, plunged to 25% in the period as a strike of about 70,000 workers that began on January 23rd shut the world's biggest platinum mines. I couldn't resist talking of, putting this quote in from Bloomberg: the articulation of the AMCU position by white foreign nationals, signaling interest of the foreign forces in the destabilization of our economy, is a disturbing development, said Gwede Mantashe, the General Secretary of the ANC. Dollar rand 1063.86. Egyptian pound steady at 715.03. The Egyptian stock market rallied 1.12% yesterday. It's up 26.703%, and Africa's best in 2014. The Nigeria All Share, which is up just under 1% in 2014, has rallied, however, 7.907% over the last 4 weeks. The Ghana Stock Exchange is up 10.11655%. But I'll come to it in a second. But you've lost about 25% in cedi devaluation. Javier Blas writes that Zambia's lesson for Ghana, called the IMF, and I think he's exactly right. I'll put up a chart of the Ghana cedi in 2014. It's been in free fall. Zambia kwacha pretty much in free fall as well, but you can see news of the IMF support turned the currency higher. And I wrote over the weekend, the IMF's arrival in Accra is predicted, predictable and imminent, in my view. Ghana's central bank is printing money to help finance the government's budget deficit, threatening to fuel inflation and weaken a currency that's already the worst performer in Africa this year. This is Bloomberg. First quarter budget deficit of 2.1% of GDP was financed by the central bank, which provided funding equivalent to 10% of government revenues. Carmen Altenkirk, an analyst at Fitch. Investor concern that Ghana's government will struggle to rein in spending has contributed to a 23% slump in the cedi against the dollar this year. Inflation is 14.7%. Printing money to finance the deficit will aggravate already high inflation and contribute to further steady weakness, Alton Kirk again. Calls to Ghana's central bank governor Kofi Wampa didn't connect, and yesterday the currency weakened as much as 3.5%, closed 1.3% lower at 30750, bringing its loss this year to 23%. It's quite a situation and a debacle. Sudan's annual inflation rate rose to 41.2% in May, reflecting a 3.9% monthly rise, underlining the soaring cost of food. That's always a worrying sign. Sudan reporters go online to challenge state crackdown on press, saying that upstart news website Al Tariq, which means the way in Arabic, reported, saying they reported differently to what the government was reporting, and they're managing to get the news out via the online portal. Africa, the big prize for Dubai private equity group. This is about Abraaj, talking about their plans for expansion in Africa. Within the next 12 to 18 months, Abraaj expects to deploy between $200 million and $300 million in sub-Saharan Africa from its existing funds, and to raise an additional $500 million to $750 million in capital, he said. Quite interesting granularity, looking at Ethiopia, Angola, Kenya, making some interesting points. MasterCard has an African Cities Growth Index, which makes some very interesting reading. Link is on Rich Wrap-Ups, saying in sub-Saharan Africa, much of the growth in the previous decade came from two related sources. First was the commodity windfall, hugely improved the region's terms of trade. Second was increasing investment from China, related to China's demand for resources and its need to secure future supplies, saying that sub-Saharan Africa is urbanizing quickly. According to the UN estimates, 60% of sub-Saharan Africa's population will be living in cities by 2050, almost doubling today's 36%. And then saying, on balance, Accra is the African city with the greatest promise of inclusive growth and a better material life for its population in the years ahead, which I thought was interesting. Most of the countries seem to be on that side of Africa, in point of fact. Accra, Kumasi, Freetown, Sierra Leone, Lagos, Nigeria, Casablanca, Tripoli in North of Africa. Sierra Leone says its death toll from the contagious Ebola virus has doubled in 1 week, with hopes of containing the outbreak now fading. I'll put up a virus disease diagram that I found on the BBC. Bob Godek has penned an op-ed. Let's not allow conspiracy theorists to divert our attention from insecurity. All told, the US government provides nearly 85 billion shillings each year to Kenyan assistance. And this money is given as grants, not loans. We are partners in business development and the fight against terrorism. In addressing these challenges, US embassies in close touch with the Kenyan government provide billions of shillings in equipment, training to Kenya's security forces. We share with the Kenyan authorities all the information we have about threats. The United States also cooperates closely with the Somali government and AMISOM to combat the problem at its source. There should be no doubt the US is working very hard to help Kenya strengthen its security. At the same time, the Kenyan government has increased security for the international community, including the US Embassy, and we are grateful for that. We are in this fight together. The first obligation of the US government, like all governments, is to inform and protect its citizens. Our travel warnings and security messages are not political statements. In August, President Obama has invited President Kenyatta to join him at the first US-African Leaders Summit, which will be another major opportunity to deepen our relations. The partnership between Kenya and the United States has accomplished much. The threat from extremists poses new challenges. We remain a strong and steadfast partner of the government and people of Kenya. 85 billion shillings is a lot of money. And one senses on counter-terrorism is not entirely optimal. Mumias Sugar sacked its CEO Peter Kibati and commercial director Paul Murgor after finding them culpable for illegal sugar imports that cost the listed miller 1.1 billion shillings. This has been going on for quite a while, a number of years, in point of fact. And I particularly worked that out one year when the sugar price went simply off the charts and the P&L of the company didn't change. Mshwari lifts CBA above equity in loan accounts. Commercial Bank of Africa has overtaken Equity Bank as the lender with the highest number of loan accounts, buoyed by the growing number of subscribers to its mobile money platform. Mshwari CBA's loan accounts grew to 897,000 last year, up from 89,000 in 2012, placing it ahead of Equity Bank, which closed the year with 840,000 borrowers. That's incredible, isn't it, really? Williamson Tea reported full-year profit after tax slipped 13.43%. Even after that, the PE of this company is 3.4414. Profit before tax down 10.09%, profit after tax down 13.43%. Final dividend was reduced by 6.666% to 7 shillings a share. And this is an 8.6% dividend payout ratio, which really is incomprehensible and has been for a number of years. Captoria Tea reported that full-year profit after tax declined to 29.89%. Turnover was down 11.877%. Full-year dividend was reduced by 33.333%. It tends to exhibit higher beta, so when tea prices are low and they're at 6-year lows, it tends to get beaten up a bit more than Williamson. When it rises, it tends to outperform Williamson. Longhorn Kenya reported its full-year 2013-2014 earnings, but they were barely changed. Trades on a P of 12.947. I read that East Barbarians at the gate. Getting the money is the easy part. Do have a look at it if you care to. NSE Kenya's reshuffled the NSE 20 index. Britam, Centum and CFC Stanbic are in. Kakuzi, Uchumi, Mumias are out. Kenya shilling was lost at 87.352. The Nairobi All-Share up 9.484% in 2014. And not too far off a high hit on the 12th of May. NSE 20 down for the year 1.8473%. And then finally I found some two beautiful photographs by a fellow called Paul Goldstein. One is wildebeest at sunset in the Maasai Mara, and the final one is of elephants in the Maasai Mara. I thought that was very beautiful as well. Once again, thank you kindly for stopping by. It's appreciated.